All the characters in the story are over 18 years old. I've never doubted my attractiveness. Since I was a teenager, I have always been in great demand on dates, at the graduation party both in high school and in college, and I had 3 marriage proposals that I declined. However, at the age of 31, I, Britt Compton, née Saunders, was experiencing a crisis of self-confidence. I married George Compton 2 years after I graduated from the Big Ten University with a bachelor's degree in communications and an additional one in French. George is a very handsome, fit guy, and he seemed to have a high libido, which I really liked. We talked about having at least 2, most likely 3 or 4 children, and we both seemed to agree with this plan. My crisis of self-confidence began shortly after my 29th birthday. George began to be less in love, less spontaneous, and less excited. Everything was unsuccessful. In fact, it was only getting worse, which made me desperate. During this time, George wasn't nasty, we didn't argue. He said he loved me. I just couldn't turn him on. This period coincided with what I began to think, as it turned out, was not quite right, that the attention from other men has also decreased. Although I usually dressed conservatively, I had some very noticeable assets that usually attracted the eyes of all men on the street, in business or public places. So, I got the impression that people don't pay attention to me anymore. I have a high metabolism and have always been in decent shape, but due to my declining self-confidence, I signed up for a health club and worked out intensively 4 or 5 days a week. 6 months later, looking in the mirror, it seemed that I became even more graceful than before. I continued the exercises further, despite the fact that my attractiveness to George did not increase at all. It was a good outlet for me, although, as most people know, training increased my desires. Around the time I turned 30, I decided to seek advice from friends I trusted. I trusted 1 unmarried and 3 married friends. They were of little use. They either dismissed my concerns or gave completely useless advice. It seems like they didn't even really understand my problems. Around the same time, Jubal Phillips, my brother's best friend from college, visited me. My brother Tim, 2 years older than me, and his wife live in the same city as George and I, and they have 2 children. His friend Jubal is consistently monogamous. At the age of 32, he was married and divorced 4 times, but never cheated on his wives. Jubal was thinking about moving to our neighborhood after his last divorce, especially since he was interviewing for a really good job at the same large international corporation that Tim worked for. I've always liked Jubal, and at one time I was in love with him. He was a big, strong, and very personable guy with a stern appearance that was very liked by about half of the female population. I met with 2 of his wives and saw photos of the others. They were all strikingly beautiful. As far as I know, there has been no cheating on either side. According to Jubal, the reason for the divorces was that he did not understand women well, and that they all turned out to be losers. "I need a stable woman like you," Jubal said several times while talking to June, Tim's wife. George and I went to visit Tim on the first Saturday when Jubal was in town and had a nice time. Jubal and I really enjoyed playing with Tim and June's children, and we even had an impromptu fun game of tag football, me and Tim's 8-year-old boy against his 6-year-old sister and Jubal. After the kids went to bed, the 5 of us adults had a lot of fun, sometimes having fun with Jubal's lighthearted stories about his crazy wives. When George and I were about to leave, Jubal asked me if I knew a health club nearby because he needed a workout, and if his interview went well, he would like to join. I invited him to be a guest at my health club the next day, and we worked out at the same time. Although not quite together, he mostly lifted weights heavier than me, while I did mostly aerobics, although we ran on neighboring treadmills for about 15 minutes, and then we sat down with smoothies. Jubal actually got his dream job and moved to our city about a month after we met. He moved into an apartment complex that was almost next to my health club. At his request, I picked up some curtains and other accessories for him, as I have good taste. I would say that we trained at the same time about 3 times a week. About a month later, we were drinking cocktails after a Saturday workout, Jubal said. "It's none of my business, but since I like you, Britt, I'm going to ask you anyway." I was a little puzzled, but I just nodded and he continued. "Why are you either unhappy, disappointed, or both?" It unsettled me, not only because he hit the nail on the head, but also because he was quite straightforward. "Why do you think that I am unhappy?" "Because you're different than before. You're not as confident and laid, back as usual. If I'm prying into my own business, tell me to fuck off. But if you need to talk to someone, I'm a good listener witness. I've had enough practice with my 4 crazy wives. I stumbled, looking at my cocktail and sipping it, then broke the pause. It's hard to talk about it, and I don't feel comfortable talking about it with a man. I talked to 4 friends, and they didn't help, and I did. My voice just went quiet. In fact, if 4 women couldn't help, maybe a man's gaze will help. I think you know me well enough to know that I won't chat, judge, or gossip, he said, running his hand over his mouth as if zipping up. I do not know why I suddenly broke down. I began to sob softly, holding my head in my hands, sitting at an outdoor table. Jubal silently cleaned up after us, took my hand, and led me to his car. He put me in the front passenger seat, rolled up the windows, and turned on the air conditioner. "All right, spit it out," he commanded as soon as the air conditioner turned on full power. "I can't," I almost sobbed. "Come on," he insisted. I took a deep breath, pulled myself together, and said, "I've lost my attractiveness. George is completely uninterested in sleeping with me. Guys don't look at me the way they used to, and I just feel like a jerk." Jubal laughed. That bastard was really laughing. I got really angry, slapped him, and yelled, "You bastard! This is not funny." I tried to open the car door, but he turned on the child lock, gently grabbed my shoulder, and said, "I'm sorry, please listen to me." The laughter was inappropriate, but it's hard for me to believe that the most beautiful woman I know is so insecure. I looked at his face intently, and it seemed to me that he suddenly realized that he had called me the most beautiful woman he knew and would like to take back his words. However, instead he took it lightly and gave out some funny nonsense, as if he thought I was joking. I finally calmed down. I just don't have a solution. I often think that maybe I need an honest assessment of my attractiveness to get rid of my demons. Even if I look good and have the right equipment, I must be a really bad lover if George doesn't show interest in me. We talked for another 20 minutes or so. He asked me seriously about why I felt this way, and I gave mostly honest, albeit incomplete answers. Finally, he said, "I'll figure something out. I want to help, Britt." "Thanks for listening, Jubal," I said, getting out of the car. It really helped me to speak out, and I'm sure you'll keep quiet, even with Tim and June. "My lips are sealed," he repeated, smiling. Almost every time Jubal and I trained at the same time, he gave me some advice or another. As a joke, he even once handed me a fake business card. Obviously, it was made on a computer printer, with the inscription, "Jubal Phillips, attractiveness expert," indicating the address of his apartment. Reasonable prices, starting at $100 per hour. When I first appeared to have a shocked expression on my face, he laughed. I chased him around his car until he let me catch him, and then pulled his ear until he screamed, "Oh, oh." This incident really lifted my spirits. After my few weeks, Jubal put me on the ground after training and said, "It's time for you to deal with George. There are a number of possibilities. He's sick and doesn't know about it. He's seriously ill and afraid to burden you with it. He's having an affair. Anyway, you should know, because you're driving yourself crazy. Meet him face to face." I was trying to avoid confrontation because I'm mostly anti-confrontation and have always been that way, but I needed to hear this advice from someone I respected. I promised Jubal that I would do that. It took me 2 days to gather my courage and confront George. Then, on Friday night, I got home before him, but I didn't cook dinner. When he came in, I said sternly, "Sit down, George." "How are you, honey?" he said defensively. "I can't go on living like this. We haven't made love in over a month. You have no romantic interest in me, despite the fact that I've tried a dozen different things, and I don't think I'm so ugly or undesirable that you should avoid any contact with me. What happened? I want an explanation, and I want it now." For the next 15 minutes, George tried to refute me. I didn't give any mercy. He started sweating profusely. Finally, he put his head in his hands and, without looking at me, said, "About 2 years ago, I finally began to admit to myself what had been gnawing at me for most of my adult life. Although I believe that I still like women, although our experience would seem to refute this, I have a strong attraction to men. Have you ever acted on that?" I asked, with much less venom or shock than I had expected. After all, Jubal's words prepared me, among other things, for this. "Yes, a couple of times." Suddenly, Everything in the world became clear to me. My last words when I got up to leave were, "And you're too cowardly to tell me that, and instead you just let me suffer?" He raised his head mournfully. "I'm sorry, Britt, but I am." I didn't hear the rest because I was already in the garage with the car keys. I backed into the driveway and called Jubal. He answered on the second ring and obviously recognized the caller ID that it was me. "Hi, Britt," he replied. "How are you? Are you busy right now?" "No, nothing important." "Are you alone or with someone?" "One. I'll be right there." When Jubal opened the door of his apartment, he had a strange expression on his face. After that, I couldn't really see his face because my eyes were closed. After we had a delightful kiss that lasted at least a couple of minutes, I interrupted it. At that moment, a confused smile appeared on his face. After that, I went to his house and we made love. Finally, we broke away from each other and stared into each other's eyes with sly grins. Jubal chuckled. "My expert assessment is that you are definitely the best in my experience." I playfully punched him in the ribs. "Well, I'm not as categorical as you are. I think I'll need another 100 or so men before I can properly evaluate you, although it looks good so far." We both laughed. I didn't leave his apartment that weekend. Jubal came to my house when I knew George wouldn't be there and brought me some clothes, since he ruined most of what I was wearing on Friday, and my laptop. I really don't know how many times we've made love. On Monday morning at breakfast, when Jubal was serving me some French toast, he casually asked, "So you're moving?" "Well, you have the right to vote, but if you don't kick me out, I'll be here tonight and every night until you stand up or make wife number 5, I replied casually, stuffing my mouth with French toast. "Sounds like a plan," was his equally nonchalant reply. "Oh, by the way, I'm meeting with a family law lawyer this afternoon, that is, a divorce lawyer. I made an appointment on Friday in anticipation of breaking up with George. When you foresaw the breakup, were you going to brainwash me this weekend?" He chuckled. "A girl must have some secrets," I smiled. "Things can move really well and quickly if you are motivated enough and know what you want." Before our weekend, I thought that Jubal and I had worked together and maybe we were right for each other. After the weekend, I was sure that I felt love for him. Obviously, he felt the same way, because by the next weekend we moved my things to his apartment and some of them to storage. I saw Sally Mission, the lawyer, on Monday. She served George at his office on Tuesday. George wanted to talk when Jubal and I were taking out the last of my things. I didn't mind. His part of the conversation was happy nonsense about how he might just be going through a phase and would want to make love to me again in the near future, that splitting our assets wasn't a good idea, that he had just been with another man 3 times, and that kind of pathetic shit. I tried to stay polite, but I was unwavering. I turned down the opportunity to give George another chance and was so excited to be living with Jubal. After I finally broke up with George, I didn't ask for any alimony, even though he earned about $15,000 a year more than me. I could have waited until he sold the house to get his half of the capital, so the divorce went through without any significant problems and without delay. On the weekend after the divorce, Jubal took me to a 4-star resort for a week. We had a fantastic time out of bed, and in bed it was something otherworldly. However, I messed up my birth control, and about 4 months after my divorce was final, I went to my obstetrician gynecologist and confirmed what the home test had already shown. I was about 7 weeks pregnant. I returned home that evening and posted all the information after I treated Jubal to one of his favorite dishes. "Okay, dude," I said. "It's time to step up. We need to buy a house. We'll start by visiting the ones that I circled on the real estate pages. Then we need to talk about baby names and buy some furniture. Why do we need this?" He asked calmly, having already read the results of the home pregnancy test. "Because you messed up my brain with your animal magnetism. I messed up my birth control, and today my doctor confirmed that the home pregnancy test was accurate. That's why, dude." "So I suppose you think I'm going to marry you," he said with a devilish grin. "You're lucky, you 4-time loser. The only reason I would marry you is to find a living father for my child," I giggled. He got married. I got married. I've already almost doubled the time he's been married to me compared to his other 4 wives combined. He still thinks that I am his best girlfriend in life. At least 4 times a week we enjoy pleasures, and I confessed a few years ago that he is also my best man in life. Jubal is still monogamous, and I no longer have any doubts about his attractiveness.